Okay, so we're talking about the two major debates that took place at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. The first one, let's jump to how it was solved, which was with the Great Compromise. The Great Compromise settled a dispute, the debates between big and small states. Big states represented by the Virginia Plan, small states represented by the New Jersey Plan, introduced by James Madison, introduced by William Patterson. The big issue here was how should states be represented in the government, the new government that they were trying to create. The Virginia Plan introduces the idea of a two-house or bicameral legislature, but both of them being based on the state's population. New Jersey Plan introduces the idea of, William Patterson introduces the idea of a unicameral legislature based only on equal numbers from each state. Of course, that would protect the smaller states from being overpowered in Congress by the bigger states, by being outvoted all the time because of the size. The compromise was to have one of each. So our House of Representatives, 435 members today, is based on states' population. New Jersey has 12, California has 53. So the bigger your population, the more representation you have in Congress. Each state is divided into congressional districts. In New Jersey, we are Congressional District number 7. Our representative, right now anyway, is Leonard Lance. So that's one side of the compromise. The lower house, the House of Representatives, is based on population. In order to please the smaller states, we introduce the second house, the second chamber, which is the Senate, made up of 2 senators from every state, so therefore it being equal. So that's that compromise. So once that's decided and agreed upon, the big question becomes, and this is the second debate, the big question becomes who gets counted in those population totals. Now this is a big issue because in the South, in some of the states, the total slave population was higher than the free white population, or equal to or higher. So you can imagine the southern states want all of their slaves counted in their population totals. The free states in the north wanted none of the slaves counted. They said they're not citizens, they're considered property. Why would you be able to include them in your population totals for representation in Congress? So the issue here is between the free states in the north and the slave states in the south. The compromise that was made in order to keep the process of writing this Constitution and getting it ratified was the 3/5 compromise, that 3 of every 5 slaves in a state would be counted in the state's population. Of course, it's a compromise that benefits the South because it's 3 of every 5. Really, 2 of every 5 would have been a compromise that was in favor of the North or the free states. But really, it should have been 0. None of them should have been counted. But the only way to keep the country together and to prevent the South from walking out of the convention was to compromise on this issue. Again, remember, this is the second time we've seen this issue arise. The first one was with the writing of the Declaration of Independence, where the Southern delegation walked out, threatened to end the whole deal. No, we're not going to be part of this declaring independence unless you remove that section about slavery. So Thomas Jefferson, under a lot of pressure, removed it. Well, here we have the 55 delegates of the Constitutional Convention agreeing to allow 3 of every 5 slaves to be counted in the southern states' total population. Again, remember, a compromise is everyone walks away not super happy because they had to give up stuff that they wanted. Okay, so once all of that's agreed upon, I just want to talk to you for a minute about how the Constitution is divided. And if you know this, you know more than most Americans, trust me. So the Constitution is divided into 7 different articles. Those articles you can think of, don't get stuck in the word article. Think of it as a chapter with broad themes. Legislative, executive, and judicial. Just remember LEJ, like we talked about in class, LEJ, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, legislative, executive, and judicial. Think of the article as the chapter heading. This chapter is about the legislative branch, or Congress, the 2 houses of Congress being the House of Representatives and the Senate, created by the Great Compromise. Article 2 describes the powers of the presidency, the executive branch. Article 3 describes the judicial branch, which is our court system, starting with the Supreme Court. Those 3 together are the 3 different branches of government. We're going to talk about checks and balances next week, but each branch, the writers of the Constitution wove into the document ways in which each branch can check the powers of the other branch to make sure that not one branch became too powerful. And we know why they would have been cynical about power, right? We've talked about that many times. So just remember that the articles are like chapters and the sections are just paragraphs in those chapters. And then finally, the clauses are just sentences within the paragraphs. It's just the way the Constitution is broken down. Everything in the Constitution is given a number. Remember, we talk a lot about Article 1, Section 8, clauses 1 to 17, being the specific or enumerated listed powers of Congress. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18 is the elastic clause, that necessary and proper clause that allows Congress to pass laws in the future that it might need to pass in order to carry out the laws, or sorry, the powers 1 to 17 that they've just given themselves. So I always like to put a line there so that you can just remember the three branches of government: legislative, executive, judicial. And then you don't even have to worry about Article 7 because it was only used once, and that was how are we going to get this document ratified by the states? So Article 7 just describes the ratification process, and it's really simple. They agreed as a body, as a political body, as a convention, that not as soon as the 9th state out of the 13 said yes to this, it would become the new government of the United States. Of course, we know that eventually happened, but that ratification process was really controversial. That's where we get the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists fighting with each other about how much power this was giving the central government. The Federalists supported it, the Anti-Federalists didn't. Eventually, they got the Anti-Federalists on board by promising a Bill of Rights, which we haven't learned about yet, but we will. Okay, Article 4 just defines the relationships that, the sort of laws and rules between states, among the states, and the states' relationship with the federal government. Article 5 describes how these guys were genius. They knew that the document would someday need to be amended, right? Maybe added on, changed in some way. So they describe how this should be done, which is 2/3 of the states have to say yes for an amendment to be passed. An amendment is a formal written change to the Constitution. It's very difficult to get. The first 10 amendments all together, I don't have it written here, do I? The first 10 amendments together are called the Bill of Rights. So they were passed right away in order to satisfy the freaking out Anti-Federalists from the smaller states who thought that this created a government that was way too powerful and would definitely eventually abuse their power. So that list of rights, citizen rights, they were written to protect us as citizens against a government that could possibly become too powerful. Only then would they ratify the Constitution. Article 6 just asserts supremacy. It's the supremacy article, which says that, and this addresses something that the Articles government didn't address, which is that the federal government is supreme over the states. Federalism, the definition of federalism is that you have a powerful central government that shares power with regional governments. Here we call those regional governments states. Well, that sharing of power is great, but if there's a conflict, one of them has to be the final arbiter, the final say. And this clause states that the federal government, if there's ever an issue, is the supreme law of the land. It is the the buck stops there. There's no debate about whether or not a state government or the federal government is more powerful. They made sure they wrote this in here to avoid any conflicts like the ones that arose under the Articles government. And so you can just remember Article 4, 5, and 6 as SAS, right? States, amendment process, and supremacy. It's easy to remember. I think that's it. Thanks.